introduction to martial arts started when I was 12 years of age. I grew up in Croydon, which is a suburb of Melbourne, Australia. And I had a friend who moved into a house opposite where we lived. He was disappearing 2 nights a week, and I eventually said, well, where are you going? Why can't we sort of hang out? And he told me he was going to a judo school. And judo, of course, back in those years, you know, without giving away age, was probably the only martial art available in martial art, and used to be on the back of comic books. You'd see articles about beat, 8 assailants with 1 finger, etc., etc. So the whole idea of judo to me was like something mysterious, something very interesting, and something very Eastern, which Westerners didn't know a lot about. So I went along with him and loved it, loved the judo. Biggest problem was, though, I was very skinny, very small, and I became like one of those cartoon characters you see where I was getting pitched from one end of the dojo, as it's called, or school, to the other. And that led me to meet another guy called John Rowe at the school, who told me about a karate school that was opening up 3 miles from where we lived in Croydon. And I'd already had a little bit of knowledge of karate through this guy showing me books on Masayama, and it was intriguing to me. So I went along and had a look at this school. And the instructor was a Hawaiian Filipino by the name of Tino Seberano. He hadn't been out in Australia very long, and he had students do a demonstration of this H-pattern form, which was called Taikyoku Jodan, Chudan, and Geidan. And I remember looking at this and seeing a little bit of sparring, and these were students he'd only had for a few months, and I thought, wow, this is what I want to do, because I realized it was more standoff than judo, where size wasn't such a factor, where speed and agility were more important. And so I started training with Tino, and that was my whole introduction to the world of martial arts. And it was the best introduction I could ever have had. My working in clubs and everything as a security, or bouncers we called them back then, they're now called security personnel, and bodyguard, that came from meeting Bob Jones. Now, Bob also started with Tino Seberano around the same time I did. Bob, 10 years older than I, was already a well-established name in the security business in Australia. He had a security network with all the local discotheques and clubs. And Bob and I got to be very good friends. And it was through Bob that, I got started in door work. I started working at a disco called Birdie's and Sebastian's, the local hangouts back in Melbourne in those days. And because I was 17 years of age when I started doing that, very small, it was quite an eye-opener to be on the doors of these clubs, because in Australia back then, pretty much the Australian male wanted to drink and fight when he went out, and if he met a girl, that was kind of a bonus, but it wasn't necessary to having a good time. So they were quite rough years. And that then snowballed on to Paul Dainty being a local entrepreneur. He rang Bob and myself up after we started schools, which is another chapter, of course, starting Zendokai, karate schools in 1972. Paul Dainty rang up and said, would we be interested in looking after the Rolling Stones? He was going to bring them out for a tour of Australia. And we said, yeah, that'd be great. And that was really the start of the bodyguard years. And it led to, 20 years of doing bodyguard work. Because I worked with, started off with the Rolling Stones, worked with Joe Cocker, Fleetwood Mac, James Taylor, Linda Ronstadt, Stevie Nicks on a solo tour, David Bowie. So the list went on and on. One of the reasons I got a lot of work, and I attribute it to the martial arts, is that people have this concept of a bodyguard as being a big kind of brute, with his arms folded and there to crack heads. And that was kind of the last thing that I would do. Because when you do the bodyguard work, you're almost like a babysitter. You're there to do so many other jobs except just be there when the violence starts. You're a deterrent as much as anything else. And I found through the martial art training that having the ability gave me the confidence to deal with, aggressive people in a lot more calm and confident manner. It wasn't a matter, I was like, wow, I got to punch this guy quickly because otherwise I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. I knew I could talk to them. I could take it to a few other levels of verbal confrontation before actually having to go physical. And that helped a lot. The thing with bodyguard work is that, we were in Hawaii once working with Fleetwood Mac, and, my partner Bob ended up having to sit this local Hawaiian gentleman on his backside, and he ended up coming back with 10 guys, big islanders, with necks out to here as they do, broken bottles in each hand. And we're at this backstage area with nowhere to go. And I said, well, I'll go this side, you go that side, because I thought this is it, we're going to get carved up. The point being that when you're doing that sort of work, you can't decide, well, this is a little bit too hard today, I'm going to go out the back door. You've got to stand your ground and everything. And so there's a certain resolve that goes with that sort of job. And I still think, again, with the martial arts training and all the obstacles that are put in front of a martial artist when he goes through his training with tough sparring, with tough training, with makiwara, you know, with breaking things and all of that, it's designed to build a certain amount of fortitude and everything to be able to handle obstacles. And, you know, so again, many incidents with bodyguard work, I don't like to even talk about them much, you know, they happen, but as much as anything, you're there as a deterrent. Mick Jagger, of course, being the first super band that I ever toured with, Bob and I got them very involved in karate. In fact, I'd have Mick at 4 o'clock in the morning, or he'd have me, it'd be more the way it should be, teaching him, like, you know, Jodonsuki, this sort of thing, punching at 4 in the morning, which I thought was always pretty funny. But Mick was one of these guys who was very aware of his fitness and how fit he needed to be. If, you know, if anyone's seen Mick on stage going, like, you know, full bore for 2 hours, it's a rigorous workout in itself. So he used to be aware of how he needed to look after himself. And karate became something that was very intriguing to him. And another one that got very much into it was Stevie Nicks. She was very into the whole spiritual side of the martial arts. But that was the whole thing on touring for me, was being not drinking, not ever doing drugs or anything else. Not saying all of them did, of course. But to have to be with Stevie again at like 3:34 in the morning, giving her leg lifts and, you know, push-ups and sit-ups, it was quite bizarre. But again, with concerts and everything, these artists, they get the adrenaline still running after doing a show. We get straight in a tour bus and we go to another city, or we go back to the hotel. So they're buzzing, they're night people. So again, their idea of a workout was at 3:34 or 5 in the morning. Wasn't exactly mine, but she got very involved. Joe Cocker was a funny guy. We never got him involved in anything in those lines. He was a very funny character, but a lovable sort of a guy. But ABBA was another one, the Swedish pop group ABBA, you know, suggested they should start working out, and they got very into the workouts every day. It became just a staple of the whole tour, is to get them out doing, you know, a whole fitness routine that I had. And in fact, the funny story with Bjorn, I thought he wanted to go for a run, and there was a hotel in Sydney, and you could see the oval from the hotel room. So I take Bjorn down. We start to run this oval. I'm thinking, oh, he'll last, you know, a lap maybe, you know, and a few of the band and other people just watching out the window to see how he'd went. We're running. I'm starting to like die. We're doing lap after lap, and I'm looking around at Bjorn. His mouth's not even open. I'm thinking, shit, this is not good. I'm not going to look too good here. And I was dying. I was thinking, I've got to stop. And of course, it turned out later, I said, so Bjorn, you seem pretty fit. And his whole thing in life was cross-country skiing, which of course is one of the most aerobic, you know, cardiovascular activities you could ever do. So he was so fit, you know. I thought, well, shit, that's the last time I'll fall into that trap again. I thought, this will look good. Here I am taking for a run, and I'm like crawling around on my hands and knees. But anyway, it's a bit of fun. The other one, of course, Linda Ronstadt. You know, I toured with Linda and James, by the way, for nearly 14 years, on off with tours. And Linda, again, got totally into the martial arts and the whole fitness aspect of training. We had a lot of years of good working out, even off tour and everything. I'd go around to her house or take her to the gym and get her involved in workouts. So again, you know, with martial arts and fitness, I think that was a great offshoot of just being a bodyguard, you know, in the pure sense of the word. It served a great purpose for these people. Yeah, Chuck, meeting Chuck, of course, was the big turning point in my life, in that Bob had gone to America, and it talked Chuck into coming out to Australia to do some demonstrations at some tournaments we were holding in Australia. We were holding in Melbourne and Adelaide and blah, blah, blah. And so Chuck came out. I think it must have been probably 1976. And I was doing a side demonstration, multiple demonstration, the same card. And we just got on like a house on fire. We became immediate friends. Chuck, if anyone's met Chuck, they'll know what I'm talking about. He's one of the most likable guys you can ever meet. He's got so much time for people, very giving. So Chuck, on leaving, said, if you ever get to California, make sure you call me, and I'd love to do some training and blah, blah, blah. So a few years later, Linda had asked me to come out to California to work full time for her as a bodyguard. So I was a bit, I'm all set up here, got karate schools, and she said to me, look, you can always go back home. I thought, you're right. So I took off, telling everybody I'd be back in a month. Of course, 20 years later, I'm still living there. But of course, when I got to LA, the first person I called up was Chuck, because again, retracking a bit, in Australia, especially then, you're very isolated in the martial arts world. In fact, Black Belt magazine was the only way that I get exposure to martial artists in the rest of the world. And in those days in America, it was Chuck Norris and Joe Louis and a few, kind of legends of that time. Chuck, of course, had already got fame through working with Bruce Lee, in Way of the Dragon. So I called Chuck up. He said, come around to the house. Started working out every morning with Chuck at his house. And, that was my beginning of my whole life in America, because Chuck introduced me to the top martial artists, Benny Okides and Tadashi Yamashita, Fumio Demura, Bill Wallace, people I used to just read about, never thought I'd ever meet, and let alone get to train with. So he opened all those doors for me. And Chuck and I are still close friends. My whole life in movies started with Chuck Norris. When I started training with Chuck, he was in the process of having the Octagon put together as a production. His brother Aaron was involved. And Chuck knew I had a lot of expertise with Okinawan weapons, and because there was a lot of ninjutsu in the movie, one of the first of that kind back then, and they needed a big bad guy that could handle different weapons. And because Chuck had already seen me do Sai, we thought, wow, that'd be interesting to bring in to the movie and for this character to be a specialist in. So I got cast as the character Kyo. Kyo was the main baddie. They had, of course, you wouldn't know it was me, even my own mother wouldn't, because I had a crimson mask on and the whole bit, because technically I was supposed to be Asian. And they darkened my face out and the whole bit. But I also played, my claim to fame with Octagon is that I died 8 times, because I was one of the 4 ninja throughout the thing, because we had masks on. I was Kyo, and I was this character Longlegs, who was a terrorist, and that's the only time you saw my face. But I always laugh, because anytime you see somebody go splat in a movie, it's probably me. But interestingly enough, Sai, by using Sai and Octagon, that caused a whole emphasis on the sale of Sai to martial artists in America. Everyone was suddenly like, wow, what's this weapon? We want to try and do this. So that was an interesting start. And that was the beginning of the movie career. I went on from there and worked with Chuck in Forced Vengeance. And it led on, of course, I met Pat Johnson through Chuck. He was a partner of Chuck at that time, which led on to the first big starring role being in Force 5. I've got into a lot of different martial arts since my start, of course, in judo and goju-ryu, Japanese style of karate. Of course, in Australia, I delved into different weapons forms, did some iaido and some aikido. But when I got to America, I started training with Chuck, of course. I went and trained with Fumio Demura, who was more of a traditional martial artist in Shorin-ryu. And started training with Benny Yokides in kickboxing, and again, that was a big change for me, being a traditional martial artist, to be in the ring, sparring with gloves on, with full contact, and learning a Muay Thai type of art. And that's carried me right through till today. In fact, my coach at the moment is Pete Cunningham, who's also worked in Hong Kong movies. Pete is a 7-time world champion, just the best coach I could ever have. I still work out with him every morning. And my biggest change in my repertoire, being a stand-up fighter, was getting involved with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, with the Machado brothers. And I met the Machados, or was introduced, I should say, to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu through Chuck Norris again. He went to Brazil for a holiday, ended up meeting the Gracies, met Horion, Rickson Gracie, and Helio Gracie, being one of the founders of Jiu-Jitsu. They gave him a tape of some of these no-rules matches they used to hold in Brazil. Chuck showed it to me, and it was quite intriguing. So that ended up with me following up on the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which, for those who don't know, is almost like wrestling, except it's a submission art. It involves chokes, arm bars, foot locks, and it's basically a ground fighting art. So here I am now to this day. My regime really is doing kickboxing for the stand-up, which involves, of course, the knees and elbows and everything else, and the ground fighting with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And it's the best combination. Because I found, for me, my early years was all traditional karate, which I thank the Lord I got involved in, as a base for me, learning the spiritual side, the esoteric side of martial arts. Now with my, bodyguard work and film work and everything, I found I have a lot more interest in the practical side of the art. And of course, kickboxing and jiu-jitsu involves that. I mean, there's not a lot of theory to it. If you get hit, you've been hit. It's not, there's no theory to that. And if you tap out with jiu-jitsu through an arm bar, you tap out because if you don't, your arm's either going to get broken or dislocated, or you're going to go unconscious. So that's kind of where I'm at now, and I'm just loving that whole aspect of martial arts. My involvement with Twinkle Twinkle Lucky Stars, and of course my start in Hong Kong movies, came through Pat Johnson. Pat had worked with Jackie Chan on The Big Brawl, which was another film Freddie Weintraub had produced. Pat and I were, used to train together, and he kind of respected my ability. And he'd mentioned to Jackie that maybe I'd be a good one to use in one of his films. And actually, the first time they called me, I was in Osaka in Japan on tour with Linda Ronstadt. I'm in my hotel room, and I get a call with this broken English, Chinese voice, saying, Jackie wants you to do a movie, what's your price? I said, wait a minute, what? He wants you to work in a movie. I said, well, when would I have to leave? And she said, well, you would have to leave in 3 days. What's your price? And I said, no, wait a minute, I can't just leave like that. I had no idea how they even found me. Anyway, that was a film, by the way, Meals on Wheels, that Benny ended up doing with Keith Vitali. Later on, a little bit later, I get a call. They wanted me to go to Hong Kong, and that was to work in Twinkle Twinkle Lucky Stars. So off I went. Of course, not knowing what I was getting into, because for anyone who's never worked in Hong Kong movies, it's as different as you can ever imagine shooting a movie could ever be. So I end up in Hong Kong, few choreography ideas in my head and everything. We shoot a few scenes, and then I'm sitting around for 3 weeks before the actual fighting starts. And I ended up doing a couple of smaller fight scenes with Jackie, but he'd injured his shoulder doing another movie, because often they shoot 2 movies simultaneously. So the big fight was then left to myself and Sammo Hung, who of course is a legend in martial art movies. Well, I remember after the first night of shooting, first of all, we shot 18 hours a day for 3.5 weeks straight, 7 days a week. And the studio was never under 115 degrees, no air conditioning, in the Golden Harvest Studios there in Hong Kong, over in the Kowloon side. So I'm dying, and I weighed a little less than I do now, and I still lost 18 pounds in weight over those 3.5 weeks, because the fighting was it's full on. It's virtually full body contact. of course, and a certain amount of facial contact, and I'm fighting Sammo Hung. Now, to anyone who's seen Sammo, you'd think, well, this guy couldn't possibly move to save his life. And one of the first things he did, he wanted me to swing a chair at his feet. And he said, I'm going to do, a half somersault flip off the floor, land on my feet, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm kind of like, mm-hmm. And he did this maybe a dozen times, and it just blew me away. And that was, of course, aside from Hong Kong movies, my introduction to Sammo Hung and Jackie Chan. I had no idea that it would involve that sort of contact. And there was a particular scene with Sammo where he's giving me an uppercut. So I'm thinking, okay, they'll put the camera over here, we'll cheat it like we would do in America, and the hit will be this far away. Wrong. So I had to find a little bit of cotton wool. Camera's kind of like here, I mean, it was lower. I've got to put my head in, and this big old fist comes through and hits me under the chin. And I mean, he's smacking me for real. I found a bit of cotton wool to put in my teeth, and I copped this maybe, half a dozen times. And I actually have that on, I took some outtakes with my video camera of those shots. And, I realized I wanted to see my face contorting in slow motion having really got hit, because especially back then, they wanted to be whatever was seemingly happening was really happening. Same with the sidekick. I mean, Sammo must have got, to the other end of a football field and hit me with that sidekick that plasters me up against the wall. And it was amazing. The only thing I'd say, well, I always am and was in particularly good shape, used to getting impact because of kickboxing, so I didn't mind. And probably taking those hits and everything and doing that was what led to me getting all the other work in Hong Kong, because they respected, Sammo and Jackie respected the fact that I wouldn't mind that. I would take the impact, I'd take the hits the same as their guys would. So it was kind of a good thing to do. But it was tough. It was tough.
Painful?
That phrase painful in a lot of the Hong Kong movies I did was really Sammo's idea. It came from first time I actually hit Sammo really hard. He starts rubbing himself, and just as a little lark, knowing, that a lot of their films there's so much of a mixture of violence and comedy in a weirdest sort of way. And Sammo just wanted me to say painful. And of course that became a little catchphrase. People remembered that line, because even in the Chinese versions, a lot of the time they used my voice still saying that word painful. So later on in the fight, I hit him again and I say,
how about now?
He said, no, because my body's all numb, this sort of humor and everything. And I add on, well, you gotta be hurting now.
You gotta be hurting now.
This sort of thing. Anyway, they ended up using it in Millionaire's Express, I think, with Sammo, and a couple of other films. It was just a gag line that Sammo came up with.
Excuse me.
The fact that I was brought in to do my own dubbing on Twinkle Twinkle Lucky Stars, a little unusual, because what people don't realize is that even with Jackie, most of the time it's not his voice you're hearing. They have a dubbing troupe that would go in, because to explain why, up until Mr. Nice Guy, just about all the Hong Kong movies are done without sync sound. In other words, there's no sound on set. And so you're just kind of being given lines and you're moving your mouth around. Then they go in afterwards and they add in the dialogue. So you're not hearing any of the real actors. They have a troupe that replaces your voice. I'm not sure why they had me come in and do it. Again, maybe it's just because I had a good friendship with Sammo. And, I made clear that I would like to be able to do that if I could, because I had always had this fear that I'd be given this, maybe this high, voice, which wouldn't be befitting the character. Anyway, so I'd go in and do my own dubbing. And some of it they would keep in, a lot of it would, of course, be completely redubbed, with Mandarin Cantonese. But then I've heard myself speak French, Portuguese, and all sorts of different languages, so it wasn't new.
world is full of dead heroes. Don't be a hero.
There's always funny trade-offs over dubbing of Hong Kong movies. I mean, you know, if you, like with my childhood, you're brought up and remember such famous lines as, "So, what's your style?" You know, or "Who's your teacher?" It's hilarious, you know, because it's usually some guy with very bushy eyebrows and glasses that's trying to be the traditional Western bad guy, and it's very, very funny because everybody's seen the takeoff of the mouth, you know, moving like this, and yeah, one line coming out. It's pretty funny. So it's funny for me to be involved in that whole procedure after being a kid and seeing these movies, never thinking I'd ever be actually working on them, and then being in the studio doing exactly that. The big difference between Hong Kong choreography and how they put a fight together and American style movie making and fight scenes. And this was one of the confusing things when I first went to do Twinkle Twinkle Lucky Stars, is that there is no master, first of all. You know, in America, meaning if I was going to do a fight scene, I'd pretty much choreograph the fight from start to end. You'd do a master shot, you know, wide shot, so the editors know what's going on, everybody knows what's going on, and then you go and do your coverage. But it doesn't happen in Hong Kong. They don't know what they're going to do after the first, say, 3 moves. So it's done purely as you go. So if I'm doing a fight scene with Jackie, for instance, I have no idea how long it's going to be and which direction it's going to go. And that's one of the big differences, which is kind of interesting because in some ways it makes them very spontaneous. Because they put the emphasis on a fight. If you're doing an action movie, they may spend weeks doing a fight. Like City Hunter, you know, 6 weeks it took me to do the fight with Jackie. They'll go in and watch the dailies and they'll decide whether the fight needs more action, needs to be longer, needs to be shorter, or if some particular technique was no good, and they'll go and shoot accordingly. But it also means that they're open to take the fight in whichever direction they want to go, make it more violent, make it more humorous or whatever, without being locked into that so-called master shot. Rating Jackie Chan as a martial artist, again, I've had the first-hand experience because I've got to do a number of fight scenes with Jackie now, and he's nothing short of phenomenal. The thing that sets people like Jackie and, again, Sammo Hung and people like that aside is that they're versed in just about every form of martial art. I can't think of a fight that they're not able to put together. And so with Jackie, you know, and his speed, his agility, the fact that he is such an incredible acrobat, along with the training he's had in different, you know, Chinese martial arts, makes him a phenomenal practitioner. And I think that's obvious with his film, you know. You know, the one thing that Jackie demands is timing, which is something that he has, you know, second to none. So to be able to do fights with Jackie, it's all about timing. You know, it's not about being a good kicker, good puncher. He won't use you unless you have the timing that will work for him and with his type of choreography. And so you put all those things together, you put his incredible physical condition, his acrobatics, you know, the way he moves, you know, with his martial arts and the traditional martial arts all mixed in, it just makes up one explosive package. The directing styles of Sammo Hung and Jackie Chan are obviously different, but the same in the fact that they are both so unbelievably creative. That it's always, it's an adventure every time you work with them, because to sit down and watch them work out a fight, you know, it's unbelievable. Sammo is very, Sammo rules the set. You know, I mean, Samo's very much in charge. Even he would admit there's a little bit of a fear factor with his boys, you know, working with him. I think Jackie has a lot more camaraderie, but of course, everybody knows when Jackie's on the set that he's the boss. So I guess what I'm saying, there's not a real lot of difference. There's obviously a difference to a degree in style and what they think works for them and, you know, for somebody else. I think Samo's a lot harder style. Samo's whole way of technique and everything is a lot more, you know, spitting back very powerful punches, whereas Jackie tends to like to move a lot more, you know, be a lot more flamboyant with his movements, and that of course comes out in the choreography. But again, both of them are equally able to choreograph such amazing stuff depending on the individual they're working with. There's a lot of difference in Hong Kong with the way actors are directed. It's very large. I'm not sure what other word to use, meaning that if you're to give an expression of fear or anger, you know, it wouldn't be underplayed. Like, I like to underplay things as a bit of an actor. And again, like Nice Guy's a good example. I have a cigar and I'm supposed to turn and laugh, and I sort of turn and go, no, Samo, no. He wants me to turn and go, So it's just very big. In other words, you almost become like a caricature. But what you realize, if you don't do that, you really don't fit in the movie. You know, it's about that. It's about larger-than-life characters, where the baddies are very obvious. There's a lot of humor. I mean, as everybody knows, a lot of Jackie's stuff was taken from old Buster Keaton movies, Laurel and Hardy, etc., etc. He wanted there to be a lot of humor, not overt violence and everything. And that also comes out in the acting, where it's not about reality so much as people just having a lot of fun, where a family can go, realize they're watching something a little farcical, you know, but it's all about entertainment.